Welcome to the Edgevana Podcast, where we illuminate subjects in the IT infrastructure space. Get ready to hear some amazing insights from outstanding individuals that will change the way you think about IT. And now, here's your host, Mark Thiele.
All right, welcome again to another edition of the Edgevana Podcast. I'm Mark Thiele, your host, and I'm joined today by Matt Trifiro. Matt has an amazing background in the edge space and is currently working with one of the leading edge companies in forward thinking. I mean, these guys were working on edge stuff before most people could spell edge. So I'm excited about the opportunity to have this conversation with Matt today. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mark, thanks so much for having me on. This is going to be a great conversation.
I've always enjoyed our interactions around edge, including, not too long ago being on your show. And so I wanted to give the audience something to think about relative to edge, right? There are a couple of problems, maybe more than a couple of problems in how people look at edge today, or how people consider the potential opportunity of edge. And so, if you think about you needing some complex solution, and you go to a mall that sells every opportunity associated with that complex solution, and yet every one of those opportunities looks and sounds like it's solving the problem the same way. How does the buyer make a decision? How does the buyer get informed? So let's talk a little bit about that. How do people look at this market? Why should they consider it at all? And when they do, how do they, make their way through the fog, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, the good choice of words. So let's unpack that, because I think there's a lot in there. So the first thing to acknowledge is that if you're a buyer in the edge market, the way that vendors are describing their solutions is improving. And that's because I think as an ecosystem, we're getting better at describing what we do. I mean, the joke is, when I started in this industry 3 years ago, when we co-founded the State of the Edge, I literally went around and asked every smart person I know, I probably even asked you, what's your definition of edge? And everybody gave me a different definition. I got the edge is the bumper of my car, it's the wall of my data center, it's the cell tower, it's the cable head end, it's the, and go on and on and on. And that's not because anybody was right or wrong. It's because there are a lot of different definitions of edge, and it's taken us some time to kind of tease apart those definitions. I think one of the most seminal innovations in this space in terms of understanding edge has been the taxonomy that the Linux Foundation just published as part of their LF Edge white paper, which does a terrific job of trying to disambiguate, the service provider or infrastructure edge, which is what you'd call the cell provider network edge, or the cable head end network edge, the right. Edge of the access networks, from the user edge or device edge or on-prem edge. Just that distinction alone is really important, but even further distinctions, like, there's a lot of people in the industry that will call a regional data center the edge. And I think for a large period of time during the evolution of the internet, that was in fact the edge of the internet.
That's right.
But now that's all changing. So being able to distinguish between the service provider edge and the regional edge and the user and device edge has become a really powerful tool to help us communicate and to help buyers understand, oh, I'm looking to do something on-prem, or I'm looking
right.
to leverage something that's coming from a cloud provider from the infrastructure side, or a combination of both, and being able to figure out, okay, well, vendor A is really in this space and vendor B is in this space because they've self-identified, right?
Yep.
But in terms of how a buyer should sort this out, I mean, it's still early days, and so most of the true buyers are early adopters, and the good part of an early adopter audience is that they're willing to sort of sift through the right. complexity and the confusion. But again, we're starting to get to the point where edge as an industry is going to cross the chasm, to use one of the Jeffrey Moore's term on this. And I think that's when a sign of that point of maturation is that we start communicating it in really unambiguous and clear ways.
Yeah.
There was another question. Oh, you asked me why people should even care about it.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of reasons. When we first started, everybody thought it was all about latency. And latency is super important, but again, there's so many shades of it. It's not just average latency, it's
Right.
tail latency. It's
Yep.
jitter, it's
Yep.
data sovereignty, it's the cost of transit, it's data gravity, it's security, it's a lot of things. But for all intents and purposes, what we mean by edge is taking the IT resources, the compute, the data, the storage, the networking, and moving it as close to the point of data creation or consumption. And that could be the car, it could be a phone, it could be a robotic arm, it could be an IoT device, it could be a medical device, it could be
Yep.
whatever we want. And I think that definition holds across all the continuum of edge.
No, I really think it does. And the only because I've used I think we've and had similar discussions on that definition, and I agree with it. And the only thing that I would add for people to think about as an overall definition is that realistically, your edge is where the support the business model.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, right. So everything you said, completely accurate, with the perspective of, well, you can get it 10 feet from the car if the supply chain of products and services that make up that opportunity are affordable, get it to within. Otherwise, maybe it's 20 feet, or maybe it's a mile, or whatever the case may be.
Yep.
Maybe it supports a different business model. I totally agree with that. And so, as we develop edge, I continue to get struck by other people even providing bigger stories about edge than I would. And I've been chasing edge, like Cole, like you, have been in this market for longer than most people have considered edge even as a thing. And I've grown to believe that the edge market, the future of the edge marketplace, is equivalent or better than the original creation and use of the internet, right? From an opportunity standpoint. So what does that mean? We already spend hundreds of billions of dollars in building infrastructure and data center and networks today. Do you think it's a real opportunity that 10 years from now we could be thinking about edge as a $500 billion industry?
Well, yes, I do, but let me put a potentially controversial caveat on that I think pretty soon, and I would say certainly the next 5 years, but maybe even faster, the edge is just going to become part of the internet. We're going to stop talking about edge. The reason we talk about edge today is because we have to create and invent and deploy a bunch of new technologies and potentially some new business models. I mean, Edgevana is a new business model. VaporIO is a new business model.
Right.
So that's all in process, and so we need a way to talk about it, about this different thing that's happening. But eventually, it's just all, we're going to create these layers of abstractions that are going to make it much more consumable for the average developer, the average enterprise, and it's just going to be the internet. So while I do think, yes, this is the fastest growing, most important extension of the internet that we're seeing right now, it's just that next evolution of something we've been watching happening for 30 years. We just need something to call it right now while we're all converging around it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think it's easy for some of us in tech to get wrapped up in the idea there are different technologies enabling it, and it's potentially solving some new problems. But realistically, edge is an evolution of more successful use of networking, which is really what the internet was, is more successful use of networking, right?
I'm glad you said that, Mark, because I think for a long time, and I think I was guilty of this. We talked about the edge in terms of devices and servers.
Yep.
And that is just a tiny portion of it. In fact, the edge, quote unquote, is as much, if not more, a networking problem than it is a compute problem.
No, I would totally agree, and I could actually make a few comments based on that. One is that you mentioned earlier about how latency isn't necessarily the only driver or the prime driver. I mean, if you and I had this conversation even a year ago, certainly 18 months ago, we probably both would have been spinning our wheels around the idea of latency and defining why the latency improvements were all the rage and all the importance.
Yeah.
But it's really easy now to demonstrate the reality being that latency might be a byproduct opportunity associated with solving a problem that's around localized data use.
Yeah, that's
and the
right.
fact that the data is so heavy and so gravity oriented that because you can't put it anywhere else, even if you wanted to, you're generating a low latency opportunity for the customer because the data is staying where the customer is creating it.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of trends that are driving this, but I think that the two that are probably the easiest for the every man or every woman to understand is that we're moving into a new generation of the internet. And the previous generations had two characteristics. One, it was the data was primarily created by content providers, and it was shipped one way down to your house. I mean, that's why, you know, when we had DSL connections back in the day, they were asymmetric. You know, we had
right.
you know, 2K up and you know, in a very different downstream, because mostly we were consuming content. We were consuming high resolution videos. We were consuming things, and that content was created by the Disneys and the Netflix and the Microsofts and the so on of the world. And that was one big characteristic of the internet. The other characteristic is that the internet was mostly humans talking to machines. Right? Humans consuming videos, humans consuming web pages, humans, you know, typing Google Docs. And well, I consider myself a fast typer and a fast thinker. I'm 5 or 6 orders of magnitude slower than a computer. I mean, I operate in ones of seconds. Computers operate in nanoseconds and microseconds. So we're shifting to a world where most of the data is going to be created at the other end of the internet, at the edge, right? So what we now call the last mile, in many senses, is going to be the first mile, right? The data, and it's copious amounts of data. I mean, it is terabytes and petabytes. I mean, huge amounts of data that we just can't move around as well as we'd like to. And when there are time constraints, latency constraints, I mean, across the United States, the speed of light makes a difference, which is kind of hard to imagine, right?
No, it's true. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No,
so we're moving to this. We're moving to this.
I was going to say, to add on to your data point, is that, I've used this, and it's a kind of an ugly analogy, just because cigarette butts create an ugly picture. But I used an analogy on a previous podcast. I think it was with Tim Crawford. And you know, when you think about data, I'm a single retail store. I'm a single factory at an edge somewhere, and I'm creating data. It's hard for me as that person creating that data to think about, well, why is my, you know, terabyte of data that I'm creating a day or a week or whatever such a big deal? Well, the big deal is you're one of millions and millions and millions of endpoints that are creating exponentially more data at the edge, not delivered to the edge. You're creating it and potentially using it at the edge. Everybody trying to take that data. It's not about one of you taking that data and putting it in Amazon's cloud or Google's cloud or some on-premises data center somewhere else. It's all of you attempting to do that.
We're moving to an era where the data is primarily going to be created at the edge and analyzed at the edge, because that's the only way you can do it in true real time. And it's probably the only way you can do it cost effectively. And again, you got to think about machines. Machines, you know, create a terabyte of data. If you're a machine, it doesn't take much effort, right? I mean, they're on 24/7. Especially, like, imagine. I mean, the new sensor of choice is a video camera, right? Video cameras can detect heat. They can detect infrared. They can detect movement. They can detect, you know, objects and things like that. And so, imagine all these 4K and even 8K video feeds. I mean, you can create a lot of data over 24 hours. And, you know, a lot of that data will be thrown out and won't be useful. But that's the other thing that's amazing, is that there's a lot of data that we as humans, you know, using our own ability to reason, won't think is valuable. But we start running these through machine learning algorithms, and we're going to see correlations that humans would never be able to detect.
Absolutely.
I mean, it may turn out that when X happens at 25 intersections in downtown Palo Alto, that creates some other thing that, you know, makes the 101 back up or something. And we as humans would never see those connections, but a bunch of machine learning algorithms that are looking at these petabytes of data over, you know, weeks, months, and years may identify correlations like that will improve our lives, because it'll improve the traffic flow or reduce accidents or, you know, whatever the potential outcome is.
Right. No, I totally agree. In fact, the first time I started thinking about that, I was maybe not incorrectly, but less specifically calling it multi-tenant IoT, with the idea that there are going to be a lot of solutions out there that, for instance, what you're just talking about in downtown Palo Alto. Palo Alto has a defined need for putting sensors on their roadways, in their parking lots, on park benches, in the grass, whatever it is, and they'll use it for those needs. But a supplier, a hardware supplier to the city or a hardware supplier to residents, a company that does delivery service like UPS or something like that, might find a completely safe from a privacy standpoint, alternative use for that same data.
Yeah.
And so to your point, the opportunity to do higher level evaluation of combined models of data collection, not just to gain additional value from the original investor, but to create effectively new business models on top of original investment, I think is one of the most exciting areas for edge and edge data going forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So as you know, as Vapor.io, you guys have been worried about this problem for a long time, and you've got some great partners. What do you guys see as your next step for helping to colonize the edge, for lack of a better description?
Well, I mean, we've got a pretty methodical plan that we've been executing against. We're focused initially in the United States, and our business is building out what we call the middle mile backbone, which is the space in most of our cities between the major internet connection point, the internet exchange point, if it exists in that city, and we can talk about which cities have them, which cities don't, and the edge of the access network. And so you can think of that, that's mostly the urban and suburban regions. There's often a lot of fiber in the ground, but it's not well organized. There's no co-location attached to it. There's no exchange. You think about what the definition of a backbone is, right? The internet backbone, it's really like 3 or 4 things, right? It's transit. You got to move bits from one end to the other. It's exchange, meaning you have to connect multiple networks together and allow them to peer or exchange data with each other. You gotta have a place to put the equipment. So you need facilities, co-location facilities, data centers, street side cabinets, whatever form factor. You have to have a place to put your routers and your servers and your disk drives. And then you've got, automation. But that's the definition of a backbone. And the middle mile doesn't have a backbone today. It's got a bunch of raw materials that don't get organized in a backbone. So our business is organizing that middle mile into a backbone. And we've completed that work in 4 cities today. So Atlanta, Pittsburgh, Chicago, and Dallas. We have another 36 cities that we're working on. We've got probably in the high 20s of those in flight right now, meaning pulling permits, pouring foundation, pulling fiber, bringing in power and electrical. And then on those locations, we drop down these micro modular data centers that we make in a factory. And then we can turn up what we call the kinetic edge, which is essentially this backbone for the middle mile. It has those attributes. It has the ability to place co-location, it's got networking, and it's got the interconnection and exchange capabilities. And so to answer your question, we're really looking to bring this capability to the tipping point, which is to be in all the major U.S. markets, the NFL cities, the major metros, which is what that 36 ends up being.
Right.
But also to catalyze the ecosystem. You mentioned the complexity of the value chain or the supply chain that needs to go into, right? Yep. I mean, so there are people below us, so to speak, or which are the folks that own the land and the fiber, right? They dig the trenches, they own the land. We lease the land from them. We lease the dark fiber for them. We put data centers, we light the fire, we put routers, we do all this stuff, and then we have tenants that come in. We have cloud providers and CDN providers and bare metal providers and all these things. And then on top of them, they have their own customers, the app developers or the middleware developers that have the app developers. And so in order to deliver a solution, you need a pretty complex stack to make the edge work. And so part of our role is catalyzing this. We have an alliance, a Kinetic Edge Alliance. We're one of the founders of the State of the Edge, which is an open source project, the Linux Foundation. And that's why we invest in all those things, because we need to bring those other elements together in order for the end user to even know how to consume it or to make sense of it.
Right. Where to even look in the yellow pages, for lack of a better description. Yeah.
That's
I mean,
right.
it's really, I've made a joke of it in the past, but it's sort of true, is that where do I go to just buy my slice of edge, right? I mean, and to some degree, that's what people are looking for, is like, I want to be able to buy a solution and attach it to my company and begin using it. And in many cases, it's not that simple, or it just can't even work, depending on what it is you're trying to deliver.
That's right. That's right. So you've got, in some cities, you've got infrastructure that's maturing, like in Dallas and Chicago, and you've got others, which, yes, so you're right. And it's a very complex question. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? And, what's your business model for going after it? Do you want to, lease servers by the hour? Do you want them on your premises or off your premises? Do you need, SLAs in terms of latency? Do you need SLAs in terms of availability? And so those are all really, really important questions. And like I said earlier, I think today only the most sophisticated buyers really know how to ask those questions. But those are the buyers from, Amazon and Microsoft and Google and Cloudflare and so on.
Right.
And those are the companies that are going to make this much easier to consume for the Citibanks and the floors and the hospital. And, so I think that we're on that path to evolution of the edge being super consumable. But we're not there yet. So that's what we're focused on is helping the industry get to the point where it's super easily consumable.
That's awesome. I mean, realistically, you guys are, for lack of a better description, for audience consumption, you guys are literally filling in a section of the puzzle, as opposed to figuring out how to make value from the existing puzzle for somebody to buy from you. You're actually literally filling in the puzzle so that the puzzle will work when somebody does buy.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you can't deliver an edge solution unless you have the infrastructure in place to do it.
That's right.
And our model is to build edge infrastructure on the network side, on the upstream side of the last mile network, and to enable people other than us, again, the cloud providers and CDNs, to offer edge services to the end user, the enterprise, for example, in a really simple and easy to consume way. Oh, right. Yes, I want to have better remote desktop functionality for my remote employees over a highly secure network, right? Okay, that's a real business problem. Well, you can't actually do that very well today unless you go out and buy a lot of expensive SD-WAN type things, and in a quick minute, you're going to be able to buy a turnkey, off the shelf, low cost solution from somebody that's put together the pieces that other people have invested in to make something quick. I mean, think about like Uber, right? The reason Uber as a startup was able to deliver such an amazing experience is because AT&T and Apple invested definitely tens of billions of dollars into building out a network that was capable of it, building out a hardware device with the software that was capable of it, mass marketing it so people would actually acquire it. And suddenly everybody's walking around with a device that has a screen, a GPS, downloadable applications. And so you can create something like Uber. And Edge is going to get to that place where there's going to be these just fabulous applications that are written by, asset lean enterprises or developers. It costs a lot of money to put even a micro modular data center in a city. I mean, it's a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of hard work. You got to move physical equipment, you can crane it onto a site and hook it up and have it run 24/7 at high SLAs. And once all those pieces in place, we don't even think about the internet today. Like, it's just there. I rarely, occasionally when everybody in my house is playing a streaming game when they're supposed to be at school and you and I can't have a podcast, that's when I notice the internet. But other than that, I don't know where the Zoom server is that's recording this call.
Right. No, it's very true, and exciting to contemplate. And so, as we come to the end of the podcast, Matt, give me your thought on what the customer could expect to see, or what the industry might expect, for those people that are fast followers or interested observers of what Edge is doing. Give me a few thoughts on what you see, say 2 years from now.
Well, I think, as I was saying earlier, 2 years from now, we're going to see what we call Edge today transition from early adopters to, the early majority in the Geoffrey Moore speak. And what that means is that the ecosystem, the different components in this stack or this supply chain are going to put together a combined solution, and it may be offered underneath, a one provider, right? It might be Microsoft or an Amazon or a Google or somebody else that's assembling all of these pieces, assembling the infrastructure assets, assembling the network bandwidth, assembling the key technologies and the middleware and the ability. I mean, this is true distributed computing, right? There's a lot of problems that haven't been solved the way we really need them solved from a distributed. How do you run applications in a distributed fashion? And it requires a lot of interesting work. Like here's one, because I think this your audience can kind of latch onto it. I just think it's interesting and overlooked. So imagine a city where today I want to create an EC2 instance. I have two choices in the US West and US East. Well, in the not too distant future, 2 years from now, you're probably going to be able to spawn a EC2 instance in Chicago West and Chicago East, not to mention Pittsburgh North and Pittsburgh South and all these things. And that's great. But when you're trying to manage an application that's spread over, let's say 1,000 different locations, you can't do that by hand. You no longer can you have a spreadsheet that says, okay, this is what my AWS console should look like. So we're going to need automated solutions for doing placement. And in an ideal world, those automated solutions are not going to consume more resources than they need to. They're going to be optimized. And so in order to optimize placement, based on cost, based on availability, based on congestion, you're going to need to get all that data. And you're going to need to have machine learning algorithms that are processing just this network data. Where is the congestion? Where are the population trends? Where are people moving to? Oh my gosh, there's a game at the stadium. If we ever have games at stadiums again, there's a game at the stadium. Let's put a bunch of instances there to prepare for the influx of fans and the services we want to offer them. So on the one hand, that isn't here yet. There's pieces of it, and you can the really advanced people. I mean, folks at Akamai have been doing distributed workloads for 20 years, right? But in terms of like the developer coming out of college or the developer that's working for a Citibank, that isn't there yet, but that tooling will become there. So it's kind of exciting. Once there's business opportunities, right? There are people that can build these software layers that are going to make this consumable. They're going to help solve these automation problems and make it so, okay, I can define a workload, and all I have to do is give it a manifest that says, this is what I want. Like, run this workload as close to this thing as you can with this level of latency, as long as it doesn't cost more than a nickel an hour, or whatever the parameters are. And you're just going to put that on your workloads, and an orchestrator is going to magically take care of that. That's all coming. I mean, I talked to the people that are building these systems. So yeah, I think in 2 years, there are going to be, your average developer coming out of college, or, just like, 5 years ago, if you were a cloud native developer, you were in high demand, everybody was hiring you. And if 10 years ago, if you were a mobile developer, well, I think it's going to be an edge developer, distributed edge developer. It's going to be some edge native developer. There's going to be a category of developer that I think in the 2-year timeframe is really going to explode. It's going to be good for us as people that provide infrastructure and services to that group, but it's also going to be really exciting for those practitioners that want to be at the front of the next wave. No, and for that matter, for so many new potential consumption models of the applications that they create, what problems they solve. I mean, I've talked about this a lot, and I tend to talk about it from the operationalizing of distributed hardware in 1,000 locations, and how many difficulties there are in that, and some of the people that are working on tools and platforms that help to solve for those problems. But to your point about orchestration, while you didn't explicitly mention it, some of the things that could be added to your list of issues and concerns that need to be addressed are things like automated ability to adapt to
new data protection laws or new compliance laws or data sovereignty laws or whatever, right?
That's right.
Policies around using only sustainable environments or policies around resiliency, right? So like I don't want to pay more than 5 cents an hour with immediate rollover to another zone unless the zone goes up to the complexity is enormous.
Yeah.
But the opportunity and the need is absolutely there. People will solve it.
Yeah, and it has to be automated because you're going to be making these decisions, every few seconds probably.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Matt, this has been fantastic. And before we wrap up, and I say thank you, tell us a little bit about where people can find you. Tell us a little bit about your own podcast and Vapor.io, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll give the plug as quickly as I can. So Matt Trifiro, I'm available at mtrifiro on Twitter. I'm the CMO of Vapor.io, as we talked about before. I'm also the co-chair of the State of the Edge project. We publish free research on edge computing. It's an open source project out of the Linux Foundation. We publish a yearly report. The 2021 report is going to come out in January, but feel free to go download last year's report and the previous 2 reports that we did. And then oh, that's how you find me. Yeah, I was going to mention one. My podcast. That's what it was. Yes. And I also am the host of the Over the Edge podcast, which we recently had yours truly on the show. It was a great conversation, and that can be found at overtheedgepodcast.com.
Awesome.
And of course on Spotify and iTunes and all those great places.
Yep. No, folks, Matt is an amazing talent, and I urge you to follow him and keep up with him wherever you have the opportunity. And Matt, thank you again for joining me on the podcast. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I look forward to finding a way to do it again sometime soon.
That sounds awesome, Mark, and I enjoyed it as well. You have a great day.
Appreciate it. Take it easy.
Thank you for listening to the Edgevana Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast listening app or on YouTube. To learn more, visit www.edgevana.com. Thanks for listening, and be sure to join us on our next episode.